extra effort to make that happen. I see we are now being live streamed. We have two items on our agenda today. The first one is the legislative agenda, and the second one is short-term rentals. Mr. City Manager?
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. So both items are time sensitive. We know that the first one, the legislative agenda, is definitely time sensitive. And Ms. Latoya is a corporate will present that to us. But we also have representations from our state lobbying firm us here today, as well as other department heads whose subject areas are directly affected by this agenda. And then the second part is the short-term rentals. So we try, we know these are two important items, two major items that we want to deal with. So we'll try and minimize our presentation so we have opportunity to discuss and give us direction. So, please.
Good afternoon, Council, and everyone else. Happy Thursday to you. It's always an honor to sit before you. I'm going to go ahead and begin our presentation. And so we come back together again today. The last time we met was on October 13th, 2022, to go over the legislative agenda process in preparation for the General Assembly legislative session 2023. Just a quick recap, and this is all information, of course, that we're well aware of. This is our Guilford County delegation.
Just bear with us a second.
Okay. Again, we just want to make sure that we acknowledge the members of our Guilford County delegation. These are, of course, our members who continue to advocate on behalf of our legislative items from session to session and year to year. Our state lobbyist, McGuire Woods, is here actually with us, at least a portion of their team. Bo Heath, who serves as our team lead, and Tommy Sevier, they're directly behind me. And so we welcome them today. For those who've not met them. And this is just a little bit about McGuire Woods, a full-service public affairs firm that offers federal, state, and local government relations, infrastructure and economic development, strategic communications, and grassroots mobilization. We wanted to note the fact that in addition to the city of Greensboro, they also serve the city of Wilmington, the city of Winston-Salem, Richmond County, and Rowan County, among the other clients that are represented. This, of course, is the illustrious team of North Carolina. This is just a quick list from the North Carolina League of Municipalities, the surveys, and all of the other feedback that they've received from policy, from legislative sessions over the last year. These are the trending topics across our state, and certainly many of these, if not all, with the exception of aging infrastructure, sit on our own priorities and stormwater and wastewater. This is the process that we ran through the last time, and I just wanted to go ahead and represent it. It's the process that we utilize in order to be able to start the agenda, sort of input, feedback, and get to where we are today. And you'll see a note there that this was also presented on October 13th. So we meet with our council members first. We meet with our department heads. We go over our items many times. And then we have a presentation of those items to council, which we are now doing for a second time today. And the hope is that we're able to review these items and then ensure, of course, that they're aligned to our priorities and then have a resolution on those items today. This is just a quick timeline of the meetings that we've had with council since August of last year to now, just to basically go over our legislative agenda, the process, what were the successes from last session, and really start thinking about legislative session 2023. And so that takes us directly into the items that are currently up for review at this time. As a note, there are 2 carryover items from last legislative session. The Civilian Traffic Investigators House Bill 303, and of course, those numbers no longer apply. They would need to be resubmitted and would be assigned new numbers should we decide to move forward and submit them for this legislative session. And then body worn cameras, which is a Senate bill that was actually ratified into law. We'll be addressing the section that speaks to access to body worn camera footage.
Hold on that though. When, Mr. Manager, when can we discuss this? Because body worn cameras have been on there for 6 years. I mean, what's the point of us trying to keep going with it?
Well, I would say that the firefighters, the presumptive disability was probably on for 6 or more years and it went through last year.
You
And
got
I
a better
think
quote with that than you do body worn cameras.
Well, unfortunately, Senate Bill 300 that went through last year actually made it more difficult to release body worn cameras than it was previous. And I think that we have to stake out our position on that we want more transparency.
So I would, at this point, Mr. Manager, I'd be interested to hear from our lobbyists what their thoughts are on body worn cameras in this bill and the city of Greensboro going against this bill. If you
We're not
think that's
against the
appropriate.
bill. We're not against the bill.
So
We would like them to add more transparency.
Isn't this the one that they're off?
No, his
No,
his
he
bill,
He came back and said something.
Yeah, what-
His concern from the
right,
first
he did,
time. So
yeah.
he
so
did
he
come
wants
back.
more transparency.
yes,
Yes, he came back.
yes.
he did.
He did.
So who in the Senate is running it?
This was part of the omnibus bill of, I'm trying to remember what the title was.
This is the criminal justice reform
Yes,
bill.
that was a big omnibus bill that had a whole bunch of stuff in it. At the very end of the bill, it was almost like an afterthought. They put something in about body worn cameras and made it a little bit more difficult to release video.
So when we have body worn camera issues, the way we handle it now legally, we typically have to go through the courts, correct?
Right.
Okay, so if that's the case, will it help or hurt or remain indifferent if we have any issue supporting or not supporting this as a legislative agenda? You understand what I'm saying, Chuck?
I'm not exactly sure what's being asked.
So if, and this me not being around for a while. If something were to present itself where we as a council or as a city want to see the body worn camera. What I'm hearing is Senate Bill 300 limits that to a certain degree,
Made it more difficult.
made it more difficult. But in essence, does that bill, how much does that bill the final say versus us going to the court system and asking a judge for us to view the body worn camera?
Zach, part of the problem for me is once we do that, we were told we cannot talk about what we see.
Yeah, that's-
We get that.
And so, you know, maybe this is petty on my part, but why look at it if you can't talk to the people you represent about what you
And-
saw?
We did just have a victory of somewhat on that.
Yeah,
Chuck?
the state Supreme Court essentially overturned Judge Bray's decision. in
Oh,
recent
good.
cases.
I'm so glad.
What the decision was essentially was that it was an abuse of discretion on her part. And it really came down because she decided to impose a gag order, mainly because you guys had not seen the video. They had 2 hearings, and when the second hearing came, and she heard that you all refused to look at the video, she just immediately ruled.
So my question is,
So I'm just, let me just finish that thought, but so now, under the, after the Supreme Court's decision, the judge has to actually articulate reasons the judge has the authority of the statute to put restrictions on review, but he says to say why. So, which will allow for review, but it wasn't a clear victory in the sense of them not being, judge not being.
So, Mayor Pro Tem, I hear what you're saying, I agree with you. No, I mean, there's one thing to watch it, one thing to be able to watch it comment.
Exactly.
But if we're going to the court, and ultimately, if you kind of think about the ultimate goal, and I've heard discussion individually that we want as few but as effective items on the legislative agenda as possible.
And again, these are just carryovers from
I know.
last year.
So if it's a carryover, how much is it worth us carrying it over at this point? And this is where our representatives can give us guidance. Because if we're gonna go to the courts anyway, how much does this Senate bill have effect? Is it worth us taking it up, or should we take that out, table it over here for future reference, and then focus on things that we feel more confident about getting passed as our true legislative agenda?
So my suggestion as to Fanny is that there are a total of 9 items here on this agenda, 2 carryovers, 7 new ones. So my advice is that we go through all of it and then you all decide. I do agree with you. The more concise they are, the better for us, the more focused we are. But I also will say if you've carried over some items for a while and there's some support for it, there's nothing wrong with carrying it forward. You may not make it a priority, but you may still want to have it there. So I'll say these are 2 carryovers, but we still have 7 new ones.
So how about this? Let's compromise on this. Can we get an opinion from our folks that on these 2 items, then we listen to the next 7,
Okay.
and then we prioritize those 7. That way we just understand where these 2 were sitting, so we can figure out if it's worth us carrying it over.
Would you like them to speak to those items, Councilman? Thank you.
Just those 2 items. And then I'll shut up, we can go to the next 7.
We all trust that.
Good.
I didn't get elected to keep quiet.
So we done it.
You'd like them to speak?
Tommy, y'all, just give it.
Yes, sir. Thomas Severe, LeVar Woods, thanks for having us here today. We appreciate the involved team. In particular to the body worn cameras issue, I think, there's 2 representatives that we would have to follow with, would be would represent Faircloth, and then Senator Britt from the Lumberton area is the key for Senate Bill 300 on the Senate side. So going into this session, we would have to follow those 2 members to see their thoughts, but of course, it'd be most interesting getting Senator Faircloth's thoughts on moving forward with this. The travel,
But do you have any indication of what they're thinking on this yet? Did it have any traction last year?
It did not. There's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of different, cities involved with different aspects of how they want to utilize body worn cameras, how they want to utilize the footage. There've been a lot of legal decisions. So it could be something to be brought up before. I would say those 2 members in particular are giving their back on the Judiciary Committee and their committee on the budget. But those would be the primary people I would first approach if we wanted to follow up with that.
Question, do you know if the league is weighed in on this as well?
I'm not sure what the league is on that. I think we can certainly follow up and let you know, but I know they have a abundance of issues that they follow and they do a great job on that, but we can follow up with you on that.
Yeah, so as a general rule of thumb, until this agenda is official, we're not going to have a whole lot of discussions with the delegation or stakeholders about it, because you guys are going to have everything finished from the agenda. Next steps for us are going to be to take this agenda, shop it to your entire delegation, first get their thoughts on it, then engage stakeholders like the league. And so those 2 things will happen over the next couple of weeks. The civilian traffic investigators, I can speak to that. There's been a little bit of momentum up throughout the interim over that, with some more groups that had initially announced that they were opposed to it, sort of showing a willingness to look at it again. So I think, they're both ones that need to be revisited, but until we talk to your delegation about it, it's, that's where we're going to have a push feedback for.
That's fair. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, sir.
New items. So we do have 7 that are up for review. The first being the chronic violators legislative item. This is a modification of General Statute 168-200.1. And we are proposing a modification of the term of enforcement. Right now, the enforcement period is a calendar year, and we are asking for a 12-month rolling period by which the city is able to enforce the nuisance law against properties that are blighted or not in compliance. I'm gonna pause for each one, so you guys take notes.
So can you explain a little more of that? So what we're asking for basically is to say, okay, after the first of the time, we can notify that property is now chronic violator, that we should on the third notice, have to go through the long lengthy notification.
Correct.
Third notice, we can begin action
So right now, the statute says that, yeah, I'm sorry, Council.
to remediate.
Yes. The statute says that a city may notify a chronic violator of the city's public nuisance ordinance if the violator's property is found in violation of the ordinance without further notice in a calendar year. We are asking for the modification of the language to be within a rolling 12-month period.
I can speak for mine. The issues that I've run into, and this would be very helpful to have it switched to a rolling 12-month. Because if somebody has a violation in June, September, and January 1st, that's 3 within rolling 12 months. But as soon as that third one hops over into January, then I need to wait for 2 more violations within that year. And I think it would be very beneficial to our neighborhoods and our residents to make this change. I know I've run into it a couple times in my neighborhoods.
Okay. The second item is a conditional rental inspection program. The City of Greensboro is requesting state legislature that would allow for a conditional rental inspection program to reduce blighted property and rental property issues and threats to public health, safety, and welfare in our communities. The city would like to require that low-income units be maintained and that the description of what the conditional rental inspection program would be is outlined. And we're referring to General Statute 160D-1207 with regards to periodic inspections. And the statute says that the inspection department may make periodic inspections only when there is reasonable cause to believe that unsafe, unsanitary, or otherwise hazardous or unlawful conditions may exist in a residential building or structure. This program is to provide for a more rigorous ability to be able to provide inspections.
That's gonna be a tough one. There's a, I get it, I'm just gonna tell you right now, that's gonna be a tough one.
But we got to try.
Yeah.
We gotta try.
There might be some,
We gotta try.
but Toya, I think that maybe we work on that language and that delivery. And Tommy, I think you know what I'm talking about, like, how can we express if the city or municipality needs some teeth without it being so subjective? Because you put, and you were talking fast, I tried to write down.
Sorry, that's the New
reasonable
Yorker
cause.
in me. Apologies.
Well, no, but, because you're throwing a lot out, and I get it, I'm not fighting it, but I'm thinking about strategically. Reasonable cause, what is the definition of reasonable cause?
Well, it's previous violations.
But I'm also, like, I think of permitting and inspections, we all hear about how, God, we must have gone to inspection on a bad day because we got in trouble, so we can't open our building, but if they're in a good mood, they can't open the building, things like that, you know what I'm saying? So, and that may be a poor analogy, and I'm not certainly trying to pick on anybody, but I'm also just thinking about how we as a city and a municipality strategically get some of these initiatives not to be carried over, but passed. And I'm also thinking if I'm sitting in those seats as a house, or as in the House or the Senate, knowing as many as I do, what will resonate with them
Sure.
and what doesn't resonate with them. And if you give, if we as a municipality, I think for Asheville, what happened in some of the things in Asheville, Charlotte, with the whole airport municipality, that authority that almost got blown up. Some of the words that you use need to be probably
Absolutely.
reconfigured.
I'm going to defer to Michelle just to kind of unpack this a little bit, but I will share with you that some of the things that we talked about was, not just healthy communities, but also a healthy workforce, right? And how healthy communities beget a healthy workforce, and that certainly the phrases and the words that we use, right, around really ultimately what we know will translate is really important. But I will defer to Michelle to kind of unpack. There's in this program, it's more around a complaint-based criteria, but I will defer to her.
So, but before you start, so I hear what you're saying about verbiage and all that, so is part of this referencing, so for example, previous history of being black? I think can kind of speak to why this would be in that instance.
So this is really, and I'll say for Tony to jump in at any point as well, this is really to target the affordable rental units in our community, because we know that they are the ones that are being cared for the least, that we have the most issues in regards to. And so this is really, if we go out, Sharon Hightower's a property owner, we get a complaint on the property first, we go out, she doesn't make those repairs, then we have the ability to take a look at her other properties.
Girl, you should have used somebody else.
I was looking at her.
I know, I'm teasing.
And it's also this issue of if you have a property and we've had to go out there multiple times, you're the kind of chronic status.
Right.
Then we have the ability to trigger conditional inspections of your other units. And the reality is it really is just an indicator that a problem is present. So it's not proactive inspections. It really is driven by complaints that are coming in. And to kind of what Latoya was saying earlier, a lot of what the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency is talking about as they talk about affordable rental units are really the economic impacts of not having those affordable rental units. And what are the health impacts when those units aren't maintained and issues like asthma are present, things like that. So it is certainly something that would only address kind of the worst offenders. That's the goal of that. This is not something that large scale would impact all of the good actors, and we have many of those in the community that are landlords. But it gives us a way to take a look at properties. The best example I can give is through the years as council has taken a look at landlords that have a large number of properties that are in violation. It will allow us to take a look at those properties and address it at one time instead of just kind of this piecemeal scattershot approach.
All right, a couple things. One, just send me the legislation that you're proposing. And I can think about it and not waste a whole bunch of time and maybe words that's because the terminology that was used from the get-go was we are going to target affordable housing in the community. So using the word target, if I'm an elected official, we don't like to use the word target. I want to hear you want me to target somebody. So I would, we gotta think through that. And by doing this, if I'm a state legislator, am I gonna say, okay, by targeting folks that are in the landlords of the affordable housing community, are you gonna then make it so the properties aren't gonna be able to be rented in an affordable standpoint, and thus you're gonna put more people on the street? And that is a real situation. So there's a fine line of that. And then if I'm a more conservative member of the state legislation, I'm gonna say, what do you have on the books right now? Because if there are multiple offenses, what do you have on the books right now that can combat that instead of us adding further state legislation to target affordable housing?
Well, it is substandard for housing.
I understand, which I understand.
And we don't have to use the word target. I said, I don't know.
I think there's some,
I don't want to use that one.
I think there's some value in Tony kind of giving the backup on
I don't want to use that.
that logic.
We did, and thank you. So Dr. Rose just mentioned the RUCO laws that allow broader based inspection. the current statute is a response to that. And the concern with doing any type of inspection program that is not complaint-based is that your inspection program, not that we would intentionally do it, but there could be some implicit bias in the inspection program. And so to eliminate the bias, the current statute is based upon complaint only. And if you get away from complaint only, your challenge with the legislature and with the courts is going to be that whatever program you design is going to have either some direct or possibility for implicit bias, which of course the legislature and the courts generally don't like. That's the reason for complaint only, and I think after having the root code, I don't know that it was Greensboro, but I think some cities ran into that issue of finding out that their inspections may have targeted, maybe not the best word, but in the end, targeted a specific class of folks that looked like a biased program.
And that's my point, it's gonna be a tough one, and I welcome y'all's feedback on tackling something like this down at the state. I mean,
Let me just say, the biggest issue with RUCO was that it encompassed all rental properties. This doesn't, so that meant every single rental unit that we had in the city of Greensboro was subject to RUCO, and that was really where the overreach was.
And we had that, and it, certain people didn't like it, I went down to Raleigh, overturned it. But it was a way that we made sure that rental property was up to par. And I think Beth, he fought very hard for that, and we got it done, and then another person overturned it.
so that-
We do need some way to make rental, people who own rental property responsible. We need to do something.
Bring it to have it as standard.
Yeah, to a certain extent.
Standards, because the problem becomes, if you do complaint driven issue of people who have problems, that they condemn and they bring it out.
Yes,
So,
that's happened.
and that has happened.
That's
We've
right.
seen it,
We have.
you know, so when you
and
talk
we've seen
people
fatalities.
well, right, so that's a protection. Really, it's a way to protect our consumers.
Just want to circle back and say that the program that we are in fact recommending, or we're asking for from a legislative perspective, is complaint-based. So it is in line with what we already know general statute doesn't in fact require. We haven't used any language in this initial draft, like the word target. We are saying, you know, that we're requiring, right, the ability to be able to look at low-income units. And so yes, as we prepare what this legislation is going to look like, we're more than happy, of course, to share that so that we can unpack the wording a bit more.
I would love to read it. I'm a
Absolutely.
visual person. I love bullet points. We talked about that. So I appreciate bullet points. On that one, I would love to see the language.
Yes.
And Mr. Manager, just wanna, and maybe I shouldn't ask this, but I am anyway. Are we, our lobbying firms, in my opinion, represent the legislature and the policies that we put forward. Is that fair?
They represent the city.
So are we allowed to have a relationship and communicate with them?
Absolutely, but it's best in my mind, since we have an intergovernment, because if you do that individually, then what happens is that the intergovernmental relations manager is not aware unless your lobbyist now communicates that to her. And so we've
So if I
been-
have that communication with them,
It's very
as long as I
important.
include Latoya,
Yeah, that's fine, yes.
okay.
Yeah.
I know Tony's been trying to say something.
Finish your thought, please.
I was just gonna say that all we're trying to get from you today is a sense of whether you agree with these items or not. That's not the end of the story today. Still going to come back.
Correct. There is another part of this process. So really today, I'm so
Yeah,
sorry.
no, all we just need is, hey, we only need 3 items.
Yes.
Or we need 1, or maybe these are not enough, we need 10.
Yes.
We just need some guidance. The expertise that Maguire would offers us is to help us clean up the narrative. That to you, and be able to do that. Nothing will be submitted to the legislature without you having to high vote.
It has to come back to council.
Because
And,
it'll be short.
and all I wanna do is give you that feedback.
Mhm.
I think, we all have different individual mindsets of how we like to do things. before I get comfortable with that second bullet point, I wanna know more about the language, the intent, how it reads. I'm gonna have a conversation with Tommy. I'm gonna say, is this, how do we tackle this and actually get it passed with you? And then when you come back to me, well, I've done my homework and hopefully we fine tune it and we get something done. That's all.
I didn't get an opportunity to say at the very beginning, none of these items are ranked per se, they are simply listed. But I will say that I think that certainly our department heads and all of the input that we've received thus far has been phenomenal in helping us to align our agenda to our priorities. And so, you know, while housing is at the top, we have not ranked anything, but we have aligned our agenda items to what we know are our city's priorities.
Well, I think since 2016, the Calvert Community Foundation does what the city's done at the ARP and our bonds. We've allocated about $100 million to affordable housing. So I'd say that that's a pretty big priority. So I think that's fine.
Thank you. The next item is the state housing fund. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Sorry, I think, Tony, you still have something you want to say?
No, I think it's been covered. I think it's been covered. I mean,
I just have a question, and I don't recall hearing this in whatever you're proposing. Is the presumption that this is all low income? Because I did hear the word, those two words, so is that the presumption of what this is?
No,
Then that becomes another one.
Yeah, and to be completely honest, you recall the meeting we were in yesterday.
Right,
Coming out of that meeting, there was a lot of fast moving to get this language firmed up for today, so there's still edits to be made
Yes.
till the point
100%.
around this.
okay.
Yes.
on the, sorry, now everyone.
Yeah, okay.
On the low income issue, you know, as a city, we're considering some other projects regarding affordable housing. Contractually, the city may build in an inspection program into those properties where city dollars are involved. So contractually, you may be able to address it with those properties without needing legislature. The legislature amendment may help with repeat offenders or chronic landlords offenders. That may give you some broader inspection ability rather than waiting on complaints, which is, I think, that is the focus of this legislation. But for affordable housing, you may have another contractual remedy down the road.
Well, I would think we should, because if we're putting our monies into the project, we should have the ability to inspect and maybe to regularly inspect. Because there are some projects we have put money in that's gone down substantially. But yet they still continue to keep that lien from us on their property, utilizing that, but they're not keeping it up.
And that's an internal process we can address.
Right, so but we're using our dollars, we should have a say, period, in how we spend that.
Mr. Manager, just out of curiosity, from a city budget perspective, if this were to go through, and this is something that city council agrees would be a good thing for us to do, when we get it passed, how are you gonna budget increasing the number of inspectors to cover this program?
Well, I don't want to speculate, but whether this program goes through or not, we need more inspectors.
That's my point.
I've had enough since I've been here from every one of you. But the need for more inspectors, so as we go to the budget, you will have ample time to discuss the budget from here.
I'm just stating in January, we need to budget more inspectors. But you're on it, it's great.
The next item is the state housing fund. The city of Greensboro is requesting a state budget amendment to increase the allocation of funding set aside for the state housing fund. Fund was created in 1987 with, I believe, the initial funding at $20.1 million for the purpose of addressing the shortage of decent, safe, and sanitary housing available at affordable prices and the importance of affordable housing to economic development. We are requesting that the General Assembly increase the state housing fund in alignment with the recommendations from the North Carolina Housing Coalition and the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency. This increase would provide for the creation of housing and increase economic development conditions for the city. I believe the current allocation in the fund right now is $10 million?
I believe that's correct.
We've
$10
seen
million
a
from the
request from
state.
both agencies at
So
30
it went
to
from
$40 million.
20.1 down to 10?
Over that period of about 30 years, and what's happened is the lack of investment in the state housing fund has put a strain onto the municipal bodies. So if we can get the state housing fund back to its
20.
target goals, it makes it better for us. from a distribution standpoint, and really for all of us. And I think the Metro Mayor's Association has talked about this.
Where are y'all?
We agree that there needs to be more money, yes, and our conversations have gone beyond that, but we certainly agree with this.
Tommy, can we get that passed?
I'm telling you, with the housing situation all over the United States of America, it should pass.
We just want to iterate again that this process, until we have an official agenda, you won't be able to.
I'm gonna ask you the same question next week with you on Zoom. I was gonna ask it in front of my fellow council members.
I'm sorry, Tommy.
I think with all these provisions, the first place we're gonna go is to, Representative John Harvester and Representative Clements. You can sit down and walk through whatever y'all end up passing as your agenda, and walk through, and get their sense of.
Heads up, Michael Garrett just got elected the head of the delegation.
Yeah, and of course, on the south side as well.
I'd rather you go also to Berger and Westburg. I agree with the housing that we have in the triad, the need. We just announced more jobs. It's gonna be 2,500. I mean,
Well, we have a housing crisis in the city. Every city in North Carolina is having a housing crisis, and we need some assistance from the state, and I think they recognize that.
I think with a lot of the issues that, that you may come through in a minute or two, as much as they touch other cities, I mean, as y'all well know, the more collaborative we are with other cities, being a coalition moving forward, whether it's the league or other, facets of moving things forward. There are a lot of items out there statewide that I think we can partner on, so. I think those guys, they don't issue.
I can say to the housing fund, there's sort of like civilian traffic, there's some momentum building around this. The conversations picked up over the last couple of years with this. You've got a lot of stakeholder groups that have this on the agenda. You've got Metro mayors, you've got, likely might end up on your agenda. It's on the Housing Coalition's agenda, it's on the Housing Finance Agency, it's on the Apartment Association's agenda. So there's gonna be a lot of people asking for that. So,
we're in line.
yes, very much so.
And just for the record, I think Hugh has joined us online.
Next item, the disposition of unclaimed firearms. We're asking for the modification of General Statute 15-11.2. Per the statute right now, the disposition of unclaimed firearms states that if a firearm remains unclaimed for a period of 30 days after the publication of the notice, the head or chief of the law enforcement agency shall order the disposition of the firearm in one of the following ways. By having the firearm destroyed if the firearm does not have a legible, unique identification number or is unsafe for use because of wear, damage, age, or modification, and will not be disposed of pursuant to subdivision 3 of this subsection, the head or chief of the law enforcement agency shall maintain a record of the destruction of the firearm. Currently, the police department is taking in approximately, and Chief, you correct me if I'm wrong, 1,200 to 1,500 firearms annually. And I think that the current inventory is somewhere upwards of 15,000 firearms at this time. So we are asking for the ability for the chief of our law enforcement agency to have at his discretion the ability to be able to destroy the firearms that are currently in inventory.
And this is something that I think the Police Chiefs Association supports. I know that we had a meeting with Governor Cooper about public safety, and the interim police chief, Biffle, also was in the same one. And this is a concern across the state. I have had discussions with members of our delegation to see if this had any legs. And quite frankly, they were surprised that this was even an issue, that cities are having to stockpile these. So I do think that it's possible. I do know other cities are going to be asking for the same thing. I think it's possible that the
Would the Metro mayors take this up?
yes,
So we're talking about making sure destroying
at the
as opposed to,
discretion of the police chief.
right,
Yes.
after a while, we're gonna pack the roof with.
Well, and it does become a security issue.
Right, and we don't back on the street, we don't sell to anybody, and I heard something starting on the news, and I'm in protection.
Thanks.
Outlets, several years, and that's scary to sell them that way. That's what it is, last.
See how much we agree on.
I can't believe Lord Jesus sparked the light.
So you're asking for the discretion, not holding them forever.
Correct.
I mean, you know. Tommy, at some point, I'm gonna call you, and I'm gonna say, how are our Republican leaders gonna accept this? Do you think they'll go with it, or do you think there'll be some kind of bull crap NRA right to bear arms thing, even though it's in our inventory and clogging up our warehouse?
It'll depend on some of those groups and their viewpoint on that.
Yeah, I mean, and the reason why I asked that question is because I like to know where the bodies are buried. That's all. I mean, no pun intended.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
We're watching this new show called Blackbirds.
But, and I have spoken with Republican members of the legislation just to see if there was the appetite to even look at it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, well, there's some folks that are our representatives that are running for statewide positions. I agree that it is just. Maybe we can figure out, put forth this and with some type of thought that we can create some type of compromise of item over 6 months. Yeah, something. I mean, something. And that takes the word discretion out of it. Go ahead, I just want to take your time on.
No, you got another thing you got to do after this.
Next item is speed limit and camera enforcement for school zones. This is actually a 3-pronged initiative, and so I will outline this very briefly, but certainly if there are deeper questions, we will defer to our transportation director. The first part of this is that the city is proposing a modification of general statute to a 25 mile per hour in neighborhood streets, residential and local streets that are not already signed for a higher speed limit. The second piece of this is a camera enforcement pilot program in a designated elementary, middle, and high school. And the last would be a request to share the revenue. And when I use the word share, I want to be specific in that we're asking only to be able to maintain and repair the cameras that we would be installing throughout these areas for the pilot program. We
Latoya,
recognize that those revenues do go to the school district.
I want to be real careful about that first bullet point. We are not asking for all city streets to be reduced to 25 mile per hour. I think that needs to be wordsmithed a bit. It is based on certain factors but that has to change.
Okay.
Because that's not the intent.
And Madam Mayor, if I may, Mr. City Manager, do we know what the approximate cost to deploy that will be? And and I see here bullet 3 that there's revenue sharing, but is there also going to be cost sharing with the county or the Guilford County Schools?
No, we will not know what it costs. He's asking about if we know what it costs.
Well, that bullet is so we get to cover our costs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
No
that's,
matter what.
yeah.
The schools get the profit. We know the schools get the profit, so the schools will automatically get everything that isn't cost.
Last time they got everything.
Last time
We
they-
ate the cost.
Yeah.
That's right.
So that,
I'm
I
not-
think what I understood Hugh to say is, will Guilford County pay half of the part of the cost too? And
Exactly.
answer is
That's exactly what we're saying. In other words, if we're supporting those efforts at the schools, just by chance, is the school system, i.e. the county, going to also share in those costs as in they are with the revenue?
We're gonna cover our costs so the idea is to cover our costs
Yes, that's
So there will be.
before we talk about revenue,
That's right.
but
There will be no costs out of our budget for it because those costs would be covered by the fines that were.
So who would buy the cameras? Because that's a cost.
right,
We would,
so
but
that
we
would
would
be
pay
covered.
ourselves back ultimately.
We would,
Well, that should be very clear in the language,
right.
because when we did that other week.
How about the cost of the equipment? Is that going to be granted to us, or is that going to be a cost to us?
Well, that's what I just asked, and so that would be a cost. We would have to buy the equipment.
Right,
And then I guess once,
Is that a cost sharing or is that just on us?
We buy.
We would buy.
Over time, we make that. Buy. Yes, we call it-
And then those costs would be covered before we did revenue sharing of the
Yes.
profit, the net profit.
That's what this,
That's exactly right.
that's what's proposed.
To be clear, it's profit goes
Right.
into this, and that's a constitutional requirement,
Right.
so it's not something to be changed.
So
What? I mean, is this a legislative agenda? Why can't we just walk across the street, go to the school board and say, we'll buy the cameras, y'all reimburse us our costs? And I mean, is it really a legislative? agenda?
We went to court over it last time and we lost. And it was because of the legislation that said all penalties and fines go to the school system, which did not give us the ability to cover our costs. So this is asking for that change to allow us to cover our costs
I understand, but what if we try to just work an agreement?
because it's legislation.
But if the
They
school
don't have
system
the authority.
agreed
They,
to-
They don't have- they can't agree
They
to
don't
it.
have the authority
They
to do
can't
that.
do it.
even if they wanted to agree with us, they
They
can't.
can't.
The provision that schools receive all costs and fines, I believe, is in the Constitution. It is not in state law. So that's not something that the legislature can easily amend. I just want to make sure that the council recognizes that. As far as the school board paying for them, they could, with the understanding that any costs and fines would go back to the school board to have paid for it. In essence, that would be a method of financing that the school board wanted to pay for. If that makes sense to your question.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering. Like. Where does this, when we're talking about, thinking about ranking legislative agendas? I just-
I don't know that we're ranking yet. I think we're just trying to get through in general. And then we can go back and rank and say, throw this one out. I think we're just trying to go through and say, this is what's here. This is what we're dealing with. Then we can go back and say, yeah, I don't put that one at the bottom of the list or take that one off. It's not worth it.
Well, that's where my head is. I'm
So
thinking
let's get through all of them so that we can understand what each one is, and then we can go through and say, throw that out.
So instead of waiting, so y'all feel good about this, y'all like this?
Well, I think it's also, it gives some protection. God forbid we have any mass shootings in school in Greensboro, I mean, anywhere, but we've had enough of them across this country, and we're still having them. That is another notch that would help us, if we were to have them.
In terms of having cameras there that solve the
Absolutely,
cars
absolutely.
going for the school zone.
Absolutely, or maybe the people.
Because right now, what's happening, people aren't slowing down in school, you know. They're bypassing in the left turn lane and right turn, so this will kind of, well, I'm on 25, that's what it says, but, this will kind of get us to kind of start to send a message that this is unacceptable. Right there, you can't put a policeman in every single school zone. So. Times, they need to be GT. So cameras will help it. This, I don't believe us to have people stuck around the red light cameras. That's one of the reasons we stopped them. It's more about safety to me.
Can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
My recollection is that when we had this program before, I thought it was really targeted at major intersections, and those were not necessarily school zones. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
So are we looking at this differently this time?
Hannah?
Sure, so this is actually a twofold request. The first is for camera enforcement in school zones, with the understanding that we would request the ability to recoup the cost of providing this program. But also, if we are in this same direction, it would give us the opportunity then to explore whether or not a red light camera program could be funded and operated in the same thing. Both of them have demonstrated safety improvements that occur when the camera systems are applied in the right intersections. and in the right places. So we're very hopeful that this could move this way.
Next item.
Mayor, Councilwoman Rosetta has a hand.
Oh, Mary Kay?
Yes, so with what Mrs. Hoffman was talking about, that was a third-party vendor who was doing the red light cameras then, and there were a lot of complaints were coming from citizens too, because there was no appeal process. That was, you know, if you had to stop real quick and might have caused an accident, sometimes, you know, there might be an appeal that you could give, but there was no appeal. It was totally a third-party company. And that's when everything started coming around that, you know, the money that the city did get, we had to give to the schools. Just wanted to clarify that. Another thing I understand is that this could free up law enforcement to be able to do other things, because I know several times they do try to sit in the area where there are the 25-mile-per-hour speed limits. So just wanted to say that, I think this one is very important, because these would be, like you said, our cameras. It would be a little different. And then hopefully there could be some revenue sharing. That's all.
Thank you, Councilwoman Wizarder. The next item is the modification of the act that is currently in place for certain municipalities to use wheel locks on illegally parked vehicles. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Talked about this some time ago, yeah.
So you may have seen it in another iteration as scofflaw status, the scofflaw statute. Yes, ma'am. What we've done now is specify the statute that we're referring to when we speak to scofflaws. And so the city is requesting for the state legislature to allow for the enforcement upon encountering legally or illegally parked vehicles. Current statute right now only allows for enforcement if the vehicle is parked illegally. Scofflaw status is determined by the parking enforcement officer using a license plate reader that identifies each vehicle in the block to determine if an overtime violation has occurred. The background software maintains a database of previous violations by plate number and can flag a scofflaw along with any vehicle that has overstayed the time limit. So currently, the act states that the city of Winston-Salem and the city of Greensboro may by ordinance for the use of wheel locks on illegally parked vehicles for which there are 3 or more outstanding, unpaid, and overdue parking tickets for a period of 90 days. We are asking for the modification of the language to include both legally and illegally parked vehicles at the time of enforcement.
So can I ask where this is coming from? Because I think we're gonna have some issues with it. Because right now, I've got a neighborhood that is suffering from some of this, getting these locks on. And I had a young man tell me, I found a way to unlock it, set the boot side, move on. So, I wanna know what purpose this is already, because what I'm hearing is 3 or more tickets, but people in Glenwood are getting it because their car is not registered to their house, and they're getting it. We gotta discuss, right now, not too comfortable, especially when you say legally as well. Illegally, we may have some basis, but, legally.
They have to have 3 violations.
3 or more.
3 or more. So who keeps up with that?
We do.
They do. I understand.
So you all want to collect money from those people, that reason for this?
Yes.
And we've talked about this a couple of different ways, that the fines that are outstanding are in excess of $2 million. And so it's a way to help collect back fines.
And I get that, but when we don't charge people for putting leaves in the middle of the street.
I'm trying to understand. I just don't like those wheel locks. Can't get worse.
So I'll tell you.
Well,
Yeah,
I gotta be honest with you, Mr. Manager, Latoya, I think, I get it. I think when I look at this and I see the next one, and I'm all for the next one. the Gate City corridor improvements, because I think, we need to do that and go from UNCG to Bennett down to A&T's campus, the Gateway Gardens down there. Gateway campus, right, but to me, from a legislative agenda, this is, A, we're not thinking big enough. B, this is somewhat staff, not even somewhat, this is majority staff driven versus what is on our legislation's mind. For example, I know of communities, in particular High Point, that have been able to garner significant capital for infrastructure improvements, even library improvements in downtown High Point. These are things that we've had money sitting at the table that Greensboro has never participated in. Really, we got $2 million for the Hall of Champions, the ACC Hall of Champions, 15 years ago. But we haven't really gone after and said, you know what, Greensboro needs some of that help. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, really? The most important things the city of Greensboro needs is to be able to lock up your tires. Seriously?
I would just say this list has been pending since August and people have had time to
I haven't seen
submit
it.
ideas.
I haven't seen it, so I would say, I've had a conversation in August or September with Latoya and Ty. This is the first I've seen, it's the first I've been approached
It's
on the
been
list.
emailed a few
This has
times.
been here, but quite, this has been.
It's the first time I've seen it. If you can tell me otherwise, I recommend it.
Absolutely. We sent this by email, but I will say that it was titled, the modification of scofflaw status statute.
Yes,
And
That's
so
not,
what you see here is the appropriate or the
That's
correct.
I'm not worried about that line item. I'm just saying, as us, as a city of Greensboro, I think once again, we're settling on what we should be asking the state to support our community. I agree with some housing, but I think you have corridor cleanups. Sharon's talking about Randall Road, the city, that we could ask for the money to help from the state to clean up Randall Road and create a true corridor. We don't have corridors really in Greensboro, or gateways. We have them, but they're not identified. What other things could we go, we need more carpet for the library. High Point got $2 million for their downtown High Point library. They got money for their depot from the state. We're talking about how to collect parking tickets.
But I have to quickly clarify though, some of those funding requests don't have anything necessarily to do with legislation as much as we going after them. If we identify competitive grants that we can go after, or if when you have conversations with your state legislators, these conversations can happen, but we still have to be the one at that level to put the application together. So I can tell you that those ones that you refer to have nothing to do with legislation, they were
But it doesn't say a legislation agenda, it says legislative agenda.
And
We are the legislators. We're going to our delegation, we're gonna be sitting in front of them as a delegation, asking from legislation to legislators, this is what we want, and this is what we need, the most identifiable things in a long session that we want your help on. And I think that there's room to really come together, not that these aren't somewhat important, in particular the housing. I think there's things we also, from a council perspective, should be strategically putting on our legislative agenda. Brownfield cleanups.
I think we're talking about two different buckets here. I think there is an agenda that we have to get help with from our legislators that are things like you're referring to. And I think there are legal changes that we would like to see made. And I think those are two separate lists. I think our lobby group helps us with both of them, but I think they're two separate lists. And I think this list that we're dealing with here, and while I agree with the Gate City corridor improvements, I think that's confusing because that falls into the category that you're talking about. We want help with this versus legal changes. Policy changes. And I think we need to look at these in two buckets because there are a whole lot of things from we need help with these types of investments. I think there are a whole lot of things that we would put on this list, not just this one, that we could go for. But I think we need to break those into two pieces. Ultimately, our lobbyists may choose to put them together, but I think it's very confusing if we try to have both of those discussions at the same time.
Well, and so I agree with you. So it's kind of, this should not be necessarily our legislative agenda. This should be minor tweaks to policy in which to help benefit cleanups and stuff. Our legislative agenda should be more big picture strategic in ways to help underserved neighborhoods and more strategic areas in which we can see state legislative support, not legislation.
So again, I think that,
Because what is our legislative agenda besides this? What are our big picture items?
and those, I think, are a whole separate one that we're not used to asking for, but we should. But I think it gets very confusing when you try to have both those conversations at the same, on the same list. Ultimately, our lobbyists may tell us, the list should be combined. But I think we walked in here thinking about the legal type rules and regulations.
And to be
type things.
clear, what we are asking for on this agenda is a change or modification to existing legislation. So we are asking for
Name
that.
it that.
In each one of these items. Well, I'm sorry, with the exception of the Gate City corridor improvements,
And
What Zach said,
the house.
yes.
It makes sense.
Zach was saying that it looks like this is what staff wants. I think it is staff driven, but it's staff driven because there are things we want done, and there's something in Raleigh that keeps us from getting done, and we need to get a legislative change in order to make it happen. So that does become our agenda. If we want better, we want our housing, we want people to do better with the rent. You can't do it unless you get the legislature to change what the legislation is down there in Raleigh. You can't do the stoplights, you can't do the wheel light, can't do any of this. And these things have been run into by the staff, and that's why it has come to this level. Because we'll say, we need to do this, how are we gonna collect our fines? And we don't have any way.
The process that she outlined when she started was a lead.
That's how it started.
Sure.
And the department heads, I guess, too, they
Yeah.
they have some problems and some of these things, and we get this all the time from our constituents. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? So some of these things we can't do at our level. There are some laws in Raleigh that keep us from making ordinances here.
Sure.
So as we're going through this, is Gate City corridor, how is it tied into legislation?
I was actually just confirmed with our lobbyists, yeah.
That's what I'm a little confused about.
Right.
Is it just a request? What is out there, just to ask for some money, because we know we should have already done, so we
Right.
don't have the money, UNCG wants to do it.
Right.
From down to one point, and we
The-
don't have the money, but is this tied into legislation, policy?
So it was tied
Because
initially.
how do you intelligently talk to your legislators when you don't know if this is policy? It's just not the logic.
Right.
I'm not gonna just talk about, I'm gonna talk to my representatives that I put a vote on. So they represent the cause.
Right. The reason why it was on our legislative agenda was because at a state level, we're asking for the transfer of ownership of Gate City to the city. And so that's more specifically, that's an NCDOT issue conversation, but the reason why we have it on the legislative agenda is because that's essentially where those conversations would begin, and I believe those conversations have already started.
But started with who, and then, to me, it's not very clear.
Maybe I can speak to
Say,
that
Gate City
quickly.
corridor improvements, okay? So we're asking for something to change to allow us to do something.
Yes.
So maybe, again, it's a state-owned road. So there's only so much that we as a municipality can do to get city as a corridor. There could be one of two paths. We could go to the NCDOT board. But the NCDOT board would likely want to have the assembly agree to turn over that corridor to us. So that's why it becomes a legislative priority here that you want to do so much along Gate City. I've been hearing that at least from UNCG since I've got here. But there's only so much we can do because it's state home.
It's state owned, so we need to change legislation, so we can take. Yeah.
So it may be.
No, you don't want to take over that state road, but you want some exceptions made.
If we take over that
You may
You want
want
exceptions made, you don't want to take it
A
over.
lot of maintenance.
That's why we have a lot of
It's too
maintenance,
expensive.
take over state road, we can't even maintain the road we do currently.
But
So it may be.
NCDOT will do some things, because they did over there in West
Yeah, but
Salem, all those, that car coalition that they did over there.
So you're asking for something.
And they said, the man said, we've never done this before, but we have, they
Because
have.
what the ask is here is actually, it's huge. We may not be able to get it, because what we're saying is not just to turn over the ownership of the road that belongs to the state, but also to come along with the funding that the state has programmed to do the work. That's, if you're asking for something huge, significant to be submitted as part of the legislative agenda, I think this is one. Because it doesn't matter what you try to do in the state-owned road, you're limited. I mean, so the idea here is that if we ask our legislators to agree with us on that, it also comes with funding. Now, it could be that as we walk through this, no, annex on it, that no, we're not gonna grant it. But at the end of the day, you won't know until you start having a conversation with your legislators.
Well, I would just submit to you that I would not ask for the road. A, it's too expensive, we don't want it, can't afford it. B, I would not want to go against the chairperson of the NCDOT down in the state of, in Raleigh. Being that the chairperson is a Greensboro resident and is fairly beloved on both sides of the aisle, it would be an embarrassment for the city to go down to the state of North Carolina and say that we want to take over an NCDOT road.
Have we talked to anybody, and I see down here, and I'm gonna finish what I'm saying, I see down here that says joint
Yes,
legislative
because-
effort with the chamber.
Yes, this has been on the college. I think it was UNCG that actually approached us and said this is a priority for them. They would like to partner with the city to make it possible. We've met with the chamber, and the chamber has also said that they would include a support for it. I've had a conversation with Mr. Fox, Michael, as well, about what we're doing. But that rather than go to the board, maybe prefer to go to the legislature and take that conversation from there. I've spoken to another Republican member of the legislature, of the NCDOT board, who actually think it's also not a bad idea, but it's best to go to.
Yeah,
the
because they'll get rid of a
legislature.
maintenance
We don't
issue.
know.
Right.
And then we don't know how far it will go. But
You
again,
won't know till you try.
we will not know. But again, this is coming out of the fact that one of our premier colleges approached us, that this is a priority for them. Would the city be willing to partner with them on this? And we thought, it's not just a city thing, let's talk to the chamber as well. It's an economic piece to this. So that's why you have
Is
that.
the college willing to share in the maintenance of this road? We talk a lot about doing things and doing maintenance. We're sitting here with buildings that we haven't kept up our own for 10 and 15 years. And now we're catching up. So, as we're talking about, Windsor Chambers, we brought it up, but we could do an endowment for Windsor Chambers. That's easy to do to make sure it stays maintained, but down the road, where's gonna be the money? Because colleges struggle, let's be honest, they all struggle.
The UNCD budget, but it's cut a lot here this year.
Yeah.
All of it.
You know,
But I
where-
tell you, I think another piece of travel.
So let me close with two thoughts.
I don't want to take over.
One is that in the past, we've always voted to support or not support the chamber's legislative agenda. So we could certainly give support through their agenda. We don't necessarily have to put it on ours if that's
Yeah,
not what
that's fine.
council wants. And then, one of the things that we talked about, I know with Latoya and the city manager, about things that expectations from our lobbyists, and that is for them to let us know when there is money available. Because there might be great funding for Brownsfield. We can certainly use them all over the city. So that really, I think, falls to our lobbyists to let us know what the availability is to go after grants.
And Mayor, can I just say, in regular communication with our lobbyists, that is something that we've been very clear about, that we want to be able to position ourselves to always be able to champion for the funding that's available. And that requires constant communication and constant monitoring around opportunities that are applicable for our city and in alignment with what we know our priorities are. I think the other piece of this too, I just wanted to say is, and Bo and I were just chatting very quickly, it's not uncommon to have a legislative agenda that has both a mix of legislative requests that require modification of general statute and appropriations requests. And I do agree that this Gate City Corridor improvements item is certainly big thinking. But we do have to come to a resolution. And so I have to ask council if there are specific items on this agenda where there's consensus for them to be removed at this time.
I still struggle with wheel box stuff.
I agree, I'm not comfortable with it at this time.
I'm gonna challenge.
With wheel lock.
Wheel lock.
I will go with you.
I can't.
All right, so take wheel locks off.
I can't go with that.
Take.
I mean,
So we take we love.
I would appreciate, it would be nice for us as a city to have some successes.
Absolutely.
And there are some things on here that probably aren't gonna pass. We wanna keep them on, but that's when we're talking with I think we need to hear more from our representative firm.
Absolutely.
To guide us on some of the things that are long shots. In addition, I would change this from a legislative agenda to recommended legislation modifications, because that's what you're talking about. You're modifying legislation, okay?
Not all of the items, but substantial number, yes.
I mean, state housing is not, you don't have it on there, but that's a modification, right? Or
Right,
that's
so the
just
state housing
request.
fund, it is on there, yes.
Yeah, no, I'm saying, but is that, Cody, I'm sorry. You've been hemming and hawing over there for all day.
I am.
Should I just shut up with,
Well,
No,
no,
this
but we
is-
don't need it, we've always called an agenda.
I understand that, but what I am trying to get us to do is get out of the rut of settling for just some modifications versus some actual things that we may be able to get and ask. Let's ask for $2 million for the Randall Road corridor. Let's ask for it. Let's ask for $10 million for brownfields. Let's ask for it. To buy the news and record site, to do something instead of letting it be a hole in the ground. Let's ask for something big from a legislative agenda. You've got repairs from our buildings that we haven't taken care of. If we need $1 million or $2 million for the downtown library, let's ask for it from a legislative agenda. Not a modification of whether we lock some rules or not.
Well, I'm just gonna say this was sent out to council January 13th with the request to review it before today's meeting and to come back with suggestions.
I'm sorry, I had suggestions.
Now, and I will say
Holy
that,
cow.
when you're talking about asking for money, you do kind of speak to some things, because a few years back, I did go, we got $1 million for the tornado area. So we did do that, and the state gave us that $1 million for tornado relief. So you can put things like that on.
Cause you asked for it.
Well,
that was,
She
she
said
asked.
she is one for the national.
That was funded at the state.
But it was, cause we sat down and had a whole conversation with Tillman, and then when we were at the ACC, we had a meeting with our legislators, and we had a whole discussion with them. I don't know if they put it on it, but I know it was an ask to approve it, because it was the attitude instituted the bill. And we had to give the support, but it passed. And So it did because of this. I remember, so there are times you can ask for money.
Tammy?
2 points. Number one, just because we think something might not pass is not necessarily, if it's the right thing to do, we should ask for it, whether it's gonna pass or not to piss people off, because I know there's a danger of pissing people off. But if something's the right thing to do, it's the right thing to do, and we should ask for it, whether we
Because
think,
it's the right.
because it's the right thing to do. That's one point. My second point is, Mr. City Manager, is there time for us to come back, or can we make time, I should say, for us to come back in terms of financial asks and things that we could perhaps append to whatever we're gonna call this document before we meet with our legislators?
So I would say that.
That we can have that discussion and still have the discussion that we need to have about short-term rentals.
Yeah, we should. This was the easy discussion.
I was gonna mention, just in terms of the, the budget process moving forward, this year the House moves forward with the budget. And so in April, we'll get the April forecast. All signs are saying that a lot of the changes that have been put in place, there's gonna be more money than they thought that the state will have, budgetary matters. But the budget process is from the House. And so Representative Fairclough, chairman, one of the, I guess, 10 chairman now of the House Budget Committee, a very influential person in the budget process. So the House would be your focal point moving forward. But in terms of ask, I mean, of course, you want to get those ready to go as soon as you can. But the House would likely pass their budget late May, then it goes to the Senate pass theirs in June, and then we've got a conference before July 1st. So just as a timeline, just.
So we will.
So I'd like to suggest that we talk about the legal modifications or legislation modifications that we've talked about today, and thumbs up or thumbs down those, and then have a separate work session on what we would like to propose and ask for investment and partner with the state on in a separate meeting, so that we can.
And that's not the only, I mean, because sometimes these funding opportunities come and the window of submission is so short that we may not be able to bring it to you and ask, we just go right afterwards.
Right.
And that applies both federal and state. I think the window that's more important is the legislative bills, not necessarily, which is very narrow, right? If we don't fix something, but that does not mean we don't have an opportunity to modify this. Oh, sorry.
So last year's budget was $27.9 million. Good bit of that was funding for local projects. And so there's two types of funds you're talking about. There's grant opportunities that are like block grants, things like that. They're put in the budget that you can go apply for afterwards. But it's not uncommon for a municipality or county to make funding requests that go into the state budget and that they're allocated here. So there's two different pots of money to pull it from. Some of them are funds that are available, and some of them are funds that you've got to ask for. And historically, more local money has come to counties and municipalities when there has been budget surpluses. So as Tommy mentioned, we had budget surplus last year, we might have the budget surplus this year. There's no harm in asking. It's going to come down to what those April numbers look like, and once the state funds their priorities, what goes back out to the locals. Other municipalities have asked for and received, and sometimes they don't receive, but infrastructure funding, renovation of historic buildings, all kinds of things. If it's got some sort of tie into economic development or just generally improving the city. I heard somebody mention buy an old building and rebuild, take that. I've seen things like that funded in the budget before. I'm not saying it's going to get funded, but that's stuff you ask for that you go to your delegation that they request during the appropriations process. And then the grant funding is stuff that's always in the budget that you go apply for after it's done.
Thank you. So The mayor has called me out, I think 3 times now, saying that there was an email sent. In this case, if you got 9 of us, I know, but it's okay to phone us or send us a text message and not just concentrate. We get a few emails. I have a full-time job. I'm an only parent. I get city emails. I do my best to keep up with them, but sometimes don't just depend on an email because they get lost. Okay? I just, as the mayor has called me out, I'm just respectfully asking.
Well, I only called you out because you said you hadn't seen it before.
I have.
So what if we were to, in the corridor piece, maybe, are we asking for money with the gateway corridor? How much are we asking? Maybe we need to combine some of our corridors, we're asking, how many?
$15 million.
50?
Yes.
And that's only for gateway. That's, so we got other corridors that need funding,
Yes.
so I'm like, we want to combine, maybe we need to combine some of our corridors, other corridors in there and go after that way. If we ask for 60, we get 50, then we know. But I would say, I would like to see us maybe add some additional requests.
I would definitely like to weigh in with some concerns about that process.
Okay.
This is really not about.
We need to move on.
I'm not saying we do more work, but in my experience, at DOT, any, giving of state property to anybody requires a vote of the council of state. It's not legislative. So, I've gone through that process before, so, in terms of which some money is on. And some of the restrictions that the DOT has are about making the roads. So forth. So there are guidelines and so forth around that. I don't think you'll get around to.
So I agree, that maybe there are 2 separate things we look at. One is more policy modification and the other is funding. Right now, we need to make some decisions about these modifications. You could put them on the council agenda as line items and they could be voted on individually, instead of just as a package.
What's that timeline? Yeah, please.
So, I mean, the General Assembly is already convened. I'll defer to our.
So I saw Senator
We're in a very,
Garrett
we have a very tight
at
space.
today's
Because we
meeting.
typically then.
He is the
deliver
new
this to our
chair of our
delegation.
delegation.
Correct, and we would need to be able to present this to our delegation so that they have a comfort level with what it is that we're asking.
And normally we do that after we vote on it, so.
Correct.
And Senator Garrett did say he would send out some dates for us that we can meet as 2 bodies.
Right. So I would say in a nutshell, we're in a pretty tight space in terms of being able to present this.
Which is why I think maybe do the up or down line item what we've got.
I agree. We already said
Do
we
we have
didn't want
consensus
to
to
wheel
take
lock.
the
We
Do we have
said that.
consensus to take the wheel off?
Yeah, I think it's.
So that is definitely off.
Yeah.
Yes. If we revisit the civilian traffic investigators, let me just go back.
Mary Kay's got her hand up again.
Oh, I can't see. Mary Kay?
Yes, just very quickly, and I won't belabor any of it, but, you know, I personally, I want to say that I would like to keep the things that carried over, that didn't, you know, the carryover items, because as the mayor mentioned, you know, the presumptive disability took several years, so I think it needs to stay in the forefront. And then only one other thing, when we get to it, on the unclaimed firearms, I was just wondering if we could change the word unclaimed, because that's not necessarily the case. Somebody correct me if I'm incorrect, but it makes it look like these are ones that have not been claimed by people. And I don't think that's what it's referencing. Am I correct? So that was all right now.
Is that right, chief? Is that good? Is that correct, you said?
The language used, I'd have to go back and look at it. So there's firearms are in various states of trying to locate owners, advertising for owners of firearms. So I would just have to look at the legislation to make sure that that matches up.
Basically, they're firearms that have been confiscated, right?
They could be confiscated, they could be turned in, they could be considered found property. They could be submitted as evidence related to a criminal case. So they could come a number of ways to the police department, and depending on how they're brought to the department, depends on the steps that we have to follow in the legislation to get to a point where we could dispose of them, and not dispose of them meaning destroy them, meaning we have to sell them.
Chief, do you have a list, an inventory list that shows whether or not they have serial numbers?
We do, and right now, our inventory is, I think, somewhere around 13,000-ish firearms that we have warehoused, and very, very few of them are not serialized, so they don't have serial. We are seeing an increase in what are termed ghost guns, but I think we only took in 150 of those last year.
I know this probably isn't relevant to nothing much, but I'm just curious, how do you get rid of it?
We don't. At this point, we haven't.
I know, but if you were to be able to, what would you do?
If we could destroy them, D.H. Griffin historically has been.
Okay,
where we
okay, I
went,
got you.
and
All right,
they
thank you
destroy
so much.
So is there consensus to keep both of the carryover items, both the civilian traffic investigators and the body worn cameras?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Is there consensus to keep the, I'm sorry, not keep, but to provide a resolution on the chronic violators, the modification of general statute 160A dash?
Yes,
Yeah.
The conditional rental inspection program?
yes.
So we're not hearing anything from our council members on Zoom. I don't want them left out of this discussion. And we don't normally take votes.
I'm okay, so I'm okay.
We can just do a line item at a council meeting.
So,
Yeah, but what I'm saying is we don't normally
Yeah,
take
do that.
votes
so
at
my,
a council meeting.
so what I'd like to clarify though, so the next council meeting is February 7th. How does that tie in with?
I will be out of the country, but the only one
She's gonna give me her proxy.
I would not do is the wheel.
Okay.
The others are fine.
I'm just
Making
wondering
that
about
statement,
the-
Mr. Attorney, you will protect me in that.
I think Hugh has a comment.
No, I was just raising my hand for the different items that I was in favor of.
We have consensus basically on where we are, and then we can just vote at council.
Line item.
Please,
So we're gonna leave them all.
I don't want the wheel, that's all.
Except for.
Yeah, I thought there was consensus on that. I did want to make sure.
On the
Moving
wheel.
Gateway in terms of ownership,
Yeah.
there was consensus. Okay,
Remove
right.
gateway for
Oh,
Yes.
Yeah.
We don't-
Yeah,
That, I got the message.
I don't think we need.
Okay, so
We did not.
now that everybody is rested and in a good mood, this was supposed to be the easy item. We have the short-term rentals.
Thank you, council. Thank you so much.
Very good try.
Okay. So I'm going to gently introduce a topic we've been to before, short-term rentals. There's been a flurry of emails in the past 24 hours. I think we've addressed the issues that have been raised, but Mike is going to walk us through because this issue has increased in intensity. Some of you get complaints about the number of Board of Adjustment cases that we've been getting because our ordinance is out of date. We don't have anything that addresses it directly. So I'm gonna let, before I steal any more of Mike's thunder, I'm gonna let him walk through quickly the presentation and we'll get to questions.
Right, and I'm gonna just try to work through this very quickly. So why are we talking about this in the first place? I think the conversation is really about how do we keep the level of activity associated with a short-term rental to be in a residential character of a neighborhood or a piece of property owned there. That's really what we're getting down to, is that these are in residential dwelling units. We want the level of activity associated with that to still be residential in nature. We are using the zoning authority that's granted to us by the state of North Carolina, as you can see, which generally talks about promoting health and safety and general welfare of the public, and really gets down to the question of balancing the rights of property owners to develop property and use property as they wish without infringing on those same rights for adjacent owners and the general public. So right now, we do not have a term short-term rental in the ordinance. So what we are regulating our short-term rental uses under is our tourist home bed and breakfast regulations. And so you can see the definition that we're using now basically says that a dwelling that's used for this purpose that can serve meals or not serve meals, overnight guests for a fee. In residential single-family zoning, a special use permit is required to establish a tourist home use. We have other districts that allow residential uses, multifamily, office, some commercial districts, and those allow a tourist home without a special use permit. But regardless of the special use permit standard, there are also development standards that apply to tourist homes. A couple things that I'll note: we do have a separation requirement currently in the ordinance for tourist homes. There's a standard that talks about the owner operating, residing on the site, using it as their property. There's a limitation on kitchen facilities, which we have discovered impacts the ability to use accessory dwelling units for this conversation. And then there's some allowances for signage. So we pulled together a stakeholder group led by the mayor to talk through this. This is obviously a topic that has been of great interest to Greensboro as well as other jurisdictions in the state. And so the group itself included short-term rental operators. So we have a couple of people that actually do this as kind of their main function. We have land use attorneys, and those attorneys had experience both working with property owners that want to do short-term rentals, as well as working with neighborhoods who had concerns about short-term rentals. So we had both perspectives in that. We did have neighborhood representatives from specific neighborhoods that had had some discussions about specific short-term rental properties, as well as the broader Greensboro Neighborhood Congress that talks about the neighborhoods as a whole. Also had folks that came in from the Realtors Association, the Hotel Motel Association, and our Convention and Visitors Bureau, because obviously part of this conversation is folks are coming to our jurisdiction and want to take advantage of this use on there. This also, we did have city staff as well to be able to talk through the implications as we work through the language and how we would enforce this at the end of the day. Met about 5 months to craft regulations. We met a number of times, talked through a lot of different things, and so this is what we've been able to put together from this group. So basically the short-term rental is those that are rented for a period of 30 days or less. And that's a key factor. And that is a standard really that's being used nationwide as a definition and a kind of cutoff point. We're talking about short-term rentals on there. Our ordinance does specifically say that an accessory dwelling unit can be part of a short-term rental. That was one of the things the ordinance right now doesn't seem to cover one way or the other. We then further broke down short-term rentals into 2 categories. The first one is a homestay short-term rental, and that's basically the property owner uses this property as their residence, and they rent out a couple of rooms, and they're there during the rental period. And then there's what's called a whole house rental. That is where the entire residence can be rented. Note that there is a minimum of 2-night stay as part of that rental, as part of our definition on there. We also note that if the person that's operating the short-term rental is not the owner of the property or use that property as their primary residence, then they have to designate a local operator with local contact information for the city. Did also further define some issues. There's some questions about what really could be a bedroom in terms of where people could stay with that. So that definition was updated to make sure it's clear that some of your common living areas, like a living room or a bonus room that's not typically used as a bedroom, would not count for that conversation. And then a local operator could be individual or a property management company. So we do have development standards that go with the short-term rentals under this proposal. Again, they're only allowed in residential dwelling units. And talk about any zoning district that didn't allow residential zoning. So I noticed earlier when I was talking about the tourist homes that there are residential zoning districts, but there are also other things like office or commercial that may allow residential uses. And so it's a similar thought process with this standard. We do try to, again, get to the question about the level of activity. So there's a standard that talks about no more than 2 adults per bedroom rented allowed as far as the number of people that can be in that short-term rental. But we do note that children do not count towards that. So that still allows for families.
Do all of our zoning districts allow dwelling units?
Not, most of our commercial districts do not. We have industrial districts that do not, and we have a couple of things like our institutional district that would only allow residential.
I understand.
That kind of thing. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm reading through this, and I know you won't do it, and I'm trying to get through it.
No, I don't wanna hurry up and get through it,
Yeah, I mean, I know we talked about this last year, and I really had to change things. Around the short-term rental, and I understand it's a problem for some people who want to not stay in a hotel, they want to rent. But what is the restrictions on how many of these short-term rentals you can have in residential areas?
400
Because then
feet,
you can
you can't have a.
Well, under the current code with tourist homes, there is a separation requirement of 400 feet, but the proposed ordinance does not specify.
So it doesn't. So you
But
can.
I
wind up-
have a problem with that.
You
so.
can wind up with a block.
I said I have a problem with that. I wouldn't want that.
And where I would worry about some of this could occur is, as you know, is where people need to live. And so you can turn around and take this and then push out people who need somewhere to stay. Because people then are gonna rent out their homes for somebody who needs some affordable type of living. Doesn't have to be low income, just to be moderate, affordable. That's what we need to understand. But then if you do that, you're taking housing stock out of what is needed. So I understand the short-term rental, I'm okay with some, but and just like with the group home, you don't put 5 group homes in a row. And you have space
I have a problem with
between
that.
group rooms, depending on the types, adult to younger. So why wouldn't we have some spacing of requirements here?
Much more than what we have.
Yeah.
We can just add that part about no it's not so many in a certain area.
I mean, you know.
Yeah, but if it's not clearly a
If
violation.
Let's put it on the list of things we want to change.
Well, and this is gonna go to planning and zoning before it comes to us, and right now it's scheduled March first for planning and zoning to discuss it, and then it's gotta come to us for public hearing. So that's it.
And I will.
Yeah, I mean,
One
I
thing we
would
want-
put it on the.
And I will note, in other jurisdictions, the standard for separation seems to have run into problems in several other jurisdictions that have talked about that. So I'm just throwing that out there as we discuss.
It's been overturned.
What did he say?
Municipalities have voted on it and it's been overturned, right?
Well, again.
They've had pushback and have ultimately not included it in their proposals. I think.
Ours is different.
Push back on number.
Oh, separation
Oh,
and caps.
Separate.
Now, the cap issue came up in the court case, we'll talk about that in a minute, but the separation piece it was proposed in several ordinances and ultimately dropped before they were approved and
But
implemented.
I think we need to have.
Thought in Wilmington it was approved and then lost in court.
But it was one of many things, it wasn't just the separation, there were multiple things. It had a registration requirement, it had a lottery system. It had there was only so many licenses going to be allowed per year, and that's, I mean, it's much different. And I can understand in a tourist industry, a tourist type place like Wilmington or Asheville, you're trying to get that frame, but that was not, it wasn't the sole thing. Well, you had separation, therefore it's overturned. It was the package of all those things together.
Yeah, the way the court dealt with it was that they struck down registration. Statute that justifies that, but then he also struck down anything that was inextricably tied to a registration provision. Like the.
So I'm not hearing separation being the.
Separation was one of.
It was one of it.
Right.
It doesn't
It was
sound
one of
like
the
you're
inextricably.
not tying that to registration per se as much as you're saying, okay, it's okay to have, but you can wind up with a whole block of these.
Yeah.
And I don't see, I mean, it's gonna
And-
benefit the homeowner,
That's right.
but if they do a whole house round, they don't even have to stay there in the house. They just do a whole house round. The signage on every house. So it allows for signage.
Actually, this proposal does not allow for signage, so that is one change.
Yeah, those sides.
It's,
I read.
Where did I read?
It said no
Yeah,
signs.
so-
Let's get,
Yeah, they said-
You want to keep going through this stuff and then
I thought it was right in here.
Yeah, let's-
Signage.
That's the existing ordinance, not the new one.
So you're changing.
Yeah, we want you to know where we are right now, so you kind of compare that to what we're thinking about in terms of the future.
Yeah,
So-
but I want to be clear.
Okay, so right now we're in the proposed language of these are the changes that this working group came through, and we feel like makes sense to move forward for the city.
Yeah, and I have some other questions.
Sure. Okay, so another thing, again, we're talking about the scale of the activity, so the proposed ordinance talks about limiting the size of any kind of gatherings associated with the short-term rental. This is an interesting balance of trying to say, we still understand that people have family come in town and want to have a family birthday party or something else on there, a small gathering, but we're not wanting to have 150 people trying to come to a single family house that doesn't have capacity and then causes problems to the neighbors on there. Yes. Signage is prohibited, so the idea is at least at the house, we continue to look like a residence with this. We did talk about the local operators, that they have to be in close proximity to the house, either being in Guilford County proper or being within one of the counties adjacent to Guilford County. And this was one that was discussed at a good bit of length, but getting to the point of the operator has the ability to get to that property in a reasonable amount of time to address an issue if something comes up with that. And then at the end, we were looking to try to give ourselves a little bit of time at the end, once this is adopted, to be able to do public education and to put in place all of our administrative tools that go with this. So kind of where we were previously, we did do a number of conversations with various interest groups in addition to the working group on there. There were 2 public information meetings that we hosted back in March. They were well attended, basically virtual conversations. People submitted questions in real time. We answered them. We followed up with that with a month to get additional input from the public and then put out additional comments and answer the questions we could for folks at that point in time on there. The working group did actually get back together after those conversations because there were some different issues that did come up. And so some additional changes were made to the proposed ordinance.
Hugh has a question.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yes, sir. It's hard to see with the shared.
No, go ahead, and then I'll ask a question afterwards.
Okay, great. So we've had our website up pretty much since February, this greensboronc.gov short-term rentals, where we've been posting information on there, but also content information to get information to staff if they had questions or other things with that. There was a council work session back in May that was referenced earlier on that, and now we're back before city council here. So I guess this is getting some questions that council had since our last conversation in May. There was some court cases and determinations on there, the Schroeder versus City of Wilmington, and ultimately what that came up with is that, as Chuck said, cities are not allowed to do a citywide registration program for short-term rentals. But the courts did keep portions of the Wilmington ordinance that talked about local zoning authority, and that's where we feel like this is our approach here, that this is regulated as a land use here in the city of Greensboro.
What's the
And
cost of that?
the cost
So
of,
if I submit something, what's the process?
We haven't established the price, so right now, Board of Adjustment, that's, I forget our case of Board of Adjustment cost or variance or special use permit hearing. What we would be looking at is a zoning permit, which we know we can only cover, it can't be extraordinary fee, it has to only cover reasonable costs. Zoning permits, we require zoning permits for group homes and family care homes, other types of modified residential facilities that have somewhat different impact on neighborhoods. So I'd hate to toss out a cost. We're looking at vendors who would handle this for us. It could be, it's not gonna be, I will say, I think I can honestly say it'll be no more than $100 of that, and probably would be less.
I think that some of that stuff would need to be, before it should come to us, should be ironed out so we know what we're voting on.
Got it.
And, you know, firming up the zoning authority, is it a public hearing? I guess the zoning planning and PC commission, or is it just internal?
It goes planning and zoning commission and then city council.
So Sue's saying no.
No, I'm saying
Oh,
the
the
ordinance,
ordinance does
yeah,
not-
I'm talking about when you get the permit, no, it's administrative.
Okay.
The ordinance per se goes to you, but the way, moving to this direction, we want to get away from the Board of Adjustments unless it's genuinely a Board of Adjustment case, and it goes to, it's a zoning permit.
Okay.
And to answer your question, it's $400 to take an item to the Board of Adjustment. So that's
fine.
as a reference point. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
And especially since they're waiting for us to do something.
Yeah, so a lot of people have interest in talking about doing short-term rentals in the city, and especially once we started this conversation, the number of people that are contacting us, just asking about, hey, we know you're looking at rules, we know changes, what can we do now, what can we do in the future? We're getting a lot of inquiries on there, so it's clear that we really need to come up with this consistent language so everybody knows what those rules are and then can move forward if they choose to. As noted earlier, we also have had a number of cases that have now worked their way to the Board of Adjustment, because we have continued to do our enforcement under our current tourist home provisions, as with any other zoning enforcement matter. And so we've had items that have come on appeal to the Board of Adjustment, or they have attempted to get either the special use permit that's required in single family zoning or variances from some of the development standards on there. Some of those things have passed, many of those things have been denied, and the board did kind of give feedback to staff. We really need to update our rules as we go through this conversation. And I know that message got from council as well. So here's kind of the process where we talk about for adopting an ordinance. You have two public hearings, one with the Planning and Zoning Commission and one with City Council. We are looking to do a special meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission on March 1st. This is a topic of great interest to the community, and given the volume of cases and other information, other things we have to do on regular meeting dates, it wasn't deemed to be feasible to do that on a regular meeting. So we do have the commission kind of agreeable to a date already if council wishes to move forward on this. Those decisions are done, approved as presented, approved with changes, and I know council wants to discuss a couple items as part of that, or amended or denied.
Recommended.
Planning and Zoning Commission is a recommendation only to City Council, and City Council has the final action authority. And part of the reason we kind of talked about, we need a little bit of time from when the ordinance is adopted to when it's actually implemented, is we have a few things Sue mentioned earlier. We need to bring on a vendor to help the city do this, to track and locate these online. This is there's a lot out there at this point. We know that already, that there's a number of short-term rentals in the city. that we don't-
750 as of early this week.
Right, so we don't have a good way of tracking that now, other than individual complaints, and that's not a very efficient way to talk through this conversation. There's going to need to be some time to do public education. These are different rules that we've been working with for the last few years. So people need to understand both if they're interested in doing a short-term rental, but also if somebody thinks they're gonna have a short-term rental in their neighborhood, they need to know what the rules are, so we know how to address enforcement issues on there with that. And we have a number of active enforcement cases right now, so we need to figure out what the impacts are of whatever's adopted on there and make those changes as necessary. So I think what we were looking at, this would be kind of, I guess, a best case timeline. If council is willing to move forward on the application today, then we would take that to Planning and Zoning Commission on March 1st. It could then theoretically come to the council then as early as March the 21st, and then we'd have a 6-month implementation. So we're looking at the 1st of September for implementation, or for it to be fully effective. So that is basically everything I've got. Happy to answer questions. I'm sure there are plenty, so.
So there won't be any specification of how far they have to be apart.
As it's currently proposed, there's no separation standards.
That I could not vote on this. I could not approve anything without that.
Mike Hugh, a couple quick questions. You may have answered some of this during the latter part of the presentation, but when it comes to the preeminence and the prevalence that we're seeing of these vacation rentals, whole house or even partial, I see where you have the staff, you have a vendor who's going to help you identify, but do we have enough staff to be the vacation rental police to track these things down and to act on them appropriately, which leads me to the next question, what is the turnaround time going to be on these? And what if it's just a one-time occurrence and somebody just wants to have a blowout party and they do it? Are we going to be able to work quickly to adjust, or is this going to be a kind of a slow spin, a 3-6 month process, and by then the damage is already done? And kind of going to what Councilwoman or Mayor Pro Tem Johnson just indicated, since Schroeder was decided out of Wilmington, and we can't have a registration process, are we able to limit the number of permits that are offered? Not a registration process, but the number of permits in a zoning district. Are they limitable?
So there's a lot of questions in that question.
I think I counted 7 here with all respect. So let me see.
We remote, you have to kind
At
of
least
save
a few of them,
one.
I'll try to answer, thinking about your last question. There's the event, we looked extensively at vendors because that was the first thing we said, if we have to do this, how much staff would we have to add? We've talked to several other cities that have these vendors, and it really, I don't want to say it takes the place of staff, but you're spending that money instead of hiring more staff. So yes, like anything else, we have no enforcement per se, but that's part of what their job is, and that's what we'd be looking for when we put out the RFP is how fast can you turn it around? How accurate are you? How well do you respond to complaints? What is your communication, for it? So those things about manpower and cost that we've done research, and once people found out we were looking at it, we have a lot of new friends that want us to consider them as well. So there's a lot of competition out there for that kind of work. So that's I think that took several of yours down. I don't remember if I got all of them. There was quite a few.
Turnaround, one
I'll just
time.
add real quick, we'll still do enforcement like we do enforcement for every other zoning violation in the city. But what this will do is help to track and identify where these short-term rentals exist on there. Many of these have 24-hour complaint lines. So if there's a late night party, for instance, that they'd have somebody they could contact, they could then contact the operator and try to get that addressed in a quicker time than staff.
Yeah, and I may have missed it, but are there any teeth? Are there any penalties, financial penalties?
So there would be, since the permit, you talk about the permit, if there's violations of it, we would revoke the permit, and then they'd be subject to our normal zoning enforcement, which would include civil penalties for continuing violations.
And how much is that right
They
now?
wouldn't have a permit, so we continue on that case.
They don't have the permit. What are those civil penalties?
So it starts with $50 and then escalates up to $500 for each violation.
Okay, and then the last question, I'm not sure if I got the answer on it, may have. Can we limit the number of permits that we approve in the zoning district? And still not violate Schroeder?
That I turn over to the Augusta learned city attorney.
Yeah, all we have to indicate sort of how that statutory provision is going to be applied to this city or the other city is one case, Schroeder. And in that case, the court found the sort of weird structure that Wilmington was trying to use, where they had a fixed number, there was an annual renewal, there was a distance separation, and the statute says you can't have a registration program for rental houses. So, it's one of those, if it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck, maybe it's a duck. And we want to stay, my advice would be to stay as far away from that as we can. But I don't think that what we're doing is that similar to Wilmington. The question is whether or not some court would find that it amounts to a registration system. So I advise that we don't have an annual renewal. I think that helps us a lot. But the separation requirement and some of the other parts of that, you know, the more you have stuff like that, the more concern you might have about losing loans.
Okay, so, City Attorney Watts, so you're saying that we don't have an annual renewal, so we also don't have an expiration. So in a sense, like with our other zoning, it runs with the land, so to speak?
That you can, just because you don't have an annual renewal doesn't mean you can't have an expiration.
Okay.
Permits are not entitled infinitum. So we can work out a reasonable timeframe of what that is, which we will have when we bring it back to you. And then it's because part of it, you want to be able to keep updated of who the contact information is, and that is for public health and safety. Who do we contact if there's a problem, an emergency, something? So we have, that's what we're looking for in the software programs of how well can they do that and have them automatically set out, or the permits are revoked if they just don't meet the conditions of the permit anymore. So for example, if they don't keep, there's a new management company they didn't tell us about, and we can't get a hold of them, your permit's revoked until it's correct, and we can put in some other provisions in there, but you only get the permit if you agree that you're going to comply with the provisions of the ordinance. So
Right.
it's not a golden ticket that you get to wait forever. So-
Right. So then to answer that question, if I heard it right, then this approval does not run with the land, it runs with the length of the permit.
It is a use of property, so it does run with the land, but if the permit can be designed in a manner that says if something changes, that the permit is now invalid and a new permit is necessary.
Okay, all right, thanks so much.
I have a
So
question.
I've got Goldie, Tammy, Mary Kay, Sharon, Nancy.
Thank you.
So Goldie?
My question, and you're talking about the distance. Well, what about those houses in that district right now on Summit Avenue? There's one house after another there. Have rentals. I mean, you know,
They're short-term rentals?
you know, they're
There's
like
a
bed
bunch
and
of-
breakfast, and they rent them out for weeks at a time. People who come for workshops or come for some company, something, and they rent them out. And they're already there. Now, if you sell them, you gotta be 400 feet apart, they can't be 400 feet.
It's not.
That's their business.
Well, and I think the key there is that if you have a non-conforming situation, it has to be legal to start with. So they'd have to demonstrate that they were legally established, then the rules changed, and then they're allowed to continue.
We're not getting into the
Right.
tourist home
And the-
provision.
Correct, and the other option is, and this is the case, there are a number of people that have gotten special use permits to operate a tourist home already, and so they still have those rights to operate as a tourist home.
And the tourist home is when you rent out a room, short term, not the whole house, right?
Just a room.
They're on,
breakfast.
Right, no, you can do both, yes, I mean, as long as the house is still your residence, you don't have to be there all the time, but it's still your residence,
but
that's
it's
the
your
distinction,
residence,
yes.
yes. Where the other ones.
That's the current standard, right?
Yeah.
It's bed and breakfast space.
Did that answer your question, I hope?
Yeah, it answers my question, you know, that sounded like you have to change.
And that's part of our challenge, we don't know what that is.
And that would work.
Tammy,
Couple questions. I mean, I think just at the tail end, you talked about how we know who's who. So if management company changes, if somebody contact person changes, who can't do the annual renewal of permits, what do other cities do for making sure that we have contact information and know who?
The burden is on them.
Okay.
It put as part of their permit, if anything changes, you must let us know. If you don't, we revoke the permit. And so if the burden is on them instead of us sending them a little note saying,
All right,
did you change?
Next question. Currently, our current policy only allows it in single family dwellings at this point, correct?
Yeah, it allows it as a number of,
Well, tourist homes, bed and breakfasts under the current regulations allow the single family are zoning districts
With a special use permit.
with a special use permit.
Right.
Now
so-
we're saying it could go into townhomes, condos, whatever, under the proposed regulation, correct?
Right, but you could do that also if you could meet separation of other things on there, that's the
Okay.
distinction. It's not the use, it's the separation standard we have now that was not.
Got
part
it.
of that discussion.
And I would assume that any homeowners association would supersede any rule that we have or any laws that we have.
Yes.
Yes, they, in fact, we've had a number of complaints of people who established Airbnbs, but then the homeowners association found out and went after the homeowner.
Right.
That's between them, but yes, that happens. They,
So is there a way for us to put into these regulations the fact that a homeowners association's rules would supersede?
I would say that's in the HOA, CCNR. So
yeah,
HOA
I think we put that in the education part. I would be very anxious about putting any kind of codification in our ordinances referring to homeowners association. We don't do that for other things. That's a private matter, but we can certainly make sure that that's part of the education.
To me, that's a key piece, that if a homeowners association votes to not, if the homeowners and the homeowner association vote not to do it in their bylaws, then I don't think we can override that.
We never do.
So what I suggest is, the ordinance won't have it, but we can have it frequently asked question. Worksheet where
Absolutely.
we can put that in as part of education.
Absolutely.
I would,
Why can't we have an A ordinance?
You don't, because we don't want to interfere, I don't let the attorneys back me up on this, we don't want to get involved in private matters of the homeowners association. Go Tony.
I may be able to clarify, the owner could not use our ordinance as a defense to the homeowner association. If the city said I can do it, you can't say that I can't. Contractually, he's obligated to the rules set by the homeowner association in which he purchased the property. He's consented.
And
Our
we
ordinance-
don't enforce their rules.
Yeah, our ordinance would not be a defense to that problem. Does that answer your question?
yes, I think that answers the question. You know, that begs the question of how easy is it gonna be for a homeowners association to pass that rule anyway? Because you've gotta have whatever percentage of your bylaw, you know, residents and
No, there's
owners.
quite a few that we found, so this is a rather active
So there
issue.
are quite a few that already have that built into their homeowners associations?
And we've also talked with apartment communities and they build in sublease standards, certain rental periods and other things. And so there are things that were actually designed for other purposes that seem to apply to these scenarios as well.
Many HOAs have rental restrictions generally. And they're as part of the bylaws. No, I'm just saying general rental restrictions.
It's usually saying you can, what we've seen is you can't rent them a short period of time. It's, less than 6 months, less than 12 months, something like that.
Okay, thank you.
I've got to
Mary
go.
Kay?
I'm going to, I think so.
Thank you. I was trying to lower my hand, but that's going to cut me off. So, two things. What people are doing when they will be having these would be, it's a business, right? Is that not considered a business?
Yeah, it's a limited commercial activity in a residential dwelling effectively.
Right. So what prevents, and I don't want to create any more work for public safety, but not enough. But what prevents the city from requiring a fire inspection? Because we would want to make sure that that facility that they are renting out, it might be a whole condo, or it might be just some rooms. What prevents the city from making sure that the person to contact, kind of like a renewal? I'm worried about this renewal thing because, and the mayor sent an email today, and then I sent one after. If they don't keep up to date who it is, and you have an incident or a fire or something at that location, that's a serious matter. So I'm wondering why, if it is a business, why they can't be required to have a fire inspection as well. Those are either yearly or every 2 years, things like that. And, you know, if there's an incident at one of the locations, of course, that would need to be looked into, but that's just a question on the public safety side.
She can't hear you.
It's not something that we researched before coming here, but I don't see why it couldn't be a part of the permit requirement.
I would think that we'd need to make sure that it has working smoke detectors and it has a fire extinguisher and some of those basic safety things.
That doesn't come close to being a registration issue.
I would think we'd have to require all of that if we were gonna have them.
Yes, that would be what I'm thinking about.
So let me just, Sharon's next, let me just say, so we've got them. So this is how we're trying to figure out how to make it safer for the general public. Right now, it's completely unregulated. We may have led the country in this because of the furniture market. We know people for decades who have been renting their houses out short term. So this is really just a safety issue. How do we get a handle on it? We know that it's happening throughout the city.
Yes.
Sharon?
Right, and since we know it's happening, how are we gonna ensure that even people get a permit? I mean, they can just open it up and do it. They don't have to, don't come get a permit.
That's part of the reason to hire the vendor. There are several companies out that this is a kind of a special niche now that they can monitor online, for instance, so they will be able to identify when that person puts that posting up on Airbnb or VRBO, and they realize it's in the city of Greensboro. They can match up the address to our GIS database, and we can figure out if a permit's been issued or not. If not, reach out to that person. Hey, by the way, these are the rules. You need to get this. Contact this person. That's part of the reason we're trying to bring someone in that has that expertise, because they're able to monitor that 24 hours a day. We won't have that capacity.
I will say, when we started looking at this a couple of years ago, we talked to Airbnb directly, and they have as part of their contract that you have to obey local ordinances. So if they find out that you've registered, but you haven't done what the city of Greensboro asked you to, you will get your rights suspended until you won't be able to advertise on through their platform until you come into compliance with the city of Greensboro. So I know Airbnb is very adamant about that because they had a lot of bad experiences early on. I don't know about the others, but that's part of what these vendors have told us about. We're investigating who does this the best, to figure out how we can help us keep track of this, because it can get, I said, I was laughing with Mike, I said, a couple of years ago, we had 300, I could tell you where most of them were. We have 750 as of Monday. So that's all that are in the different platforms.
That's not independent.
Right.
Yeah. Right, and I hear what you're saying, but people do these things for Facebook, and all of a sudden, it's bam, 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 and they're there. And
there's still zoning enforcement. If they are in violation of the ordinance, we still are a complaint-based system. We will go out and investigate and work it from there. So it's not that the vendor does 100% of everything, but we still, your folks in your neighborhood or you have a complaint about somebody's been doing this, they can't find information out about it, we go investigate. So as we do with any other part of our ordinance.
yeah, so speaking of zoning enforcement, that's the other thing. I mean, we don't enforce very well right now, the zoning, that we do have on the books where people have it's a 30 now. That's something that needs to go on the legislative agenda, see if we can get the zoning change, the enforcement change from waiting a whole 30 days to getting it correct. Because it's 30 days. If you tell them and you come and say you violated it, well, you gotta wait a whole 30 days to come back. And so that piece of it, how you gonna enforce it? How you gonna make sure, other than finding it? And if they're making money, then they're gonna pay that $50. Because
They don't just pay the fee and then they're back in compliance, they have to bring it back, and they have to bring it into compliance with the ordinance. It's not just you pay a fee and you can keep on doing what you wanna do, that doesn't happen now with what we are able to enforce in the zoning ordinance, so.
People have, listen, people run out of shop, mechanic shops in their neighborhood every single solitary day. We go out there, we say they're in violation, there, 30 days. 30 days, they still running.
Just trying to figure out how you're gonna rent my house.
Right. How long gonna rent
Are you gonna be there or out?
You ain't gonna be home.
To your point, though, the state law changed, it used to be 15 days and was actually changed to 30 days a number of years ago.
We need to go back 15. We need to put that on the legislature. That's what we need to be looking at, because we have stuff with no teeth in. I don't see how that's something. I don't have a lot of confidence in the enforcement.
Oh, yeah, that's
When people find out,
Yeah, that's right.
I'm not in compliance, because they just gonna shut it down, move to another house, keep on partying, keep on doing. I understand the person that needs a room, furniture market. That's not who's gonna be the majority of folks using these things. It's not gonna be it is.
But it is now, families are coming in, one of the biggest weekends that they, two of the biggest, one is High Point's Parents Weekend and A&T's greatest homecoming on earth. Graduations, all of them are full, because those graduations are one right after another.
Party central.
We had, we had AAU and the Wyndham at the same time. People were staying counties away because all of the hotel rooms were rented and all of the short-term
So
rentals
again,
were.
what stops the whole neighborhood then from taking?
Well, right now, there's
taking
nothing.
advantage?
Right now, there's nothing.
So when we.
So this is to have something. Right now, there's
When
nothing.
we talk about short-term rentals, I guess my brain always went, are we having people just needing somewhere to stay? We're just basically accommodating people who are coming for events. And so is there any benefit, any convention, we get revenue from hotel tax? Do we get any benefit?
They'll have to pay occupancy tax.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have to pay the tax.
And
That's one of the
people-
reasons why Airbnb is so adamant about them being registered, because they collect up all the taxes and deliver them back to the municipality and state.
I would love to know our revenue we generated in the last 5 years on Airbnb occupancy revenue.
You can ask.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, and Nancy's been waiting. Sharon, are you through or do you want?
I'd like to know that too, but it was we doing with the revenue that comes in, how is it being utilized?
We're spending it.
The CBD goes for the CBD.
Nancy?
And that doesn't help them.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. I'm pretty fairly certain of the answer, but I assume that in North Carolina, we have no ability to treat residences that are running a short-term rental differently for property tax purposes. Is indeed that the case? For instance, in South Carolina, if you operate a short-term rental in your home there, your property is taxed at a different level than if it's just your residence.
South Carolina taxes all vacation rentals. If that's not your primary residence, you pay more property tax.
That's correct. Yes, you do.
Yep.
But you also pay more if you use your residence as a
Sure.
short-term.
Like a bid.
Zach?
my
Nancy, are you
city-
through?
The only thing that, the local operators for a whole house rental is supposed to be physically located in Guilford County or counties adjacent. I don't think that's gonna fly. I know of a guy that's moving from Greensboro to Charlotte, maybe on the relationship. That wants to keep this house here as a backup, just in case that job opportunity doesn't work out. So I don't think that'll fly. I do think having it readily accessible that you have to respond within a a certain time period or something, like that, but I don't think the Guilford County or adjacent counties will fly.
I thought we had homeowner or agent.
Where agent is.
Right.
I think it has to be the homeowner.
It's
Homeowner or
it's
agent.
their-
A representative.
Their
So,
agent.
and that,
Yeah.
to get to- so in that scenario, that person would need to hire someone to manage that property.
It's a local operator, maybe I left my glasses.
No, yeah, that should probably be better defined.
I just make sure,
Yeah.
But that's what the local operator is designed for, because we have out-of-state folks, they own property and would like to be able to have this opportunity, but we said, okay, well, you still have to have a local presence, because that
Local
was.
manager.
Yeah, that's what local operators are.
Homeowner or manager, check operator.
Okay.
See, Chuck, that's one point, we'll read a whole paragraph.
Any other comments on this? It will go to zoning. At this point, I think it's scheduled
March the first is what we've scheduled at this
Is
point,
it-
if you're ready to do this.
And then we'll get comments back from zoning and their recommendation. And then decide if we need another work session or if it goes directly to an agenda. It will take a few months to get this, computer system set up. We have to go out for an RFP. I guess my question is, in anticipation of a possible short-term rental ordinance, should we send an RFP out now? It's not committing us to anything, but at least we're not waiting an extra
Yeah.
couple of months.
No, we were anticipating, we know this has been an urgent matter for you, to go ahead and, we don't have to have them under contract
Right.
yet, but we could go through the process of selection, because then we still need to add money to the budget to pay for it.
Yeah, so I would suggest to at least go ahead and do an RFP and let's see what they look like.
There's not already a specific vendor that does this?
There are several.
There's more, I mean, that's what we won a competition, because we started talking, I thought there were like 2 or 3. There's probably, I have at least a dozen, and then there's more in my, that I have their business cards, and I have more in my emails, so we wanna vet them and make sure we're getting the best possible product for the city that covers the things that you all have raised and concerns that they will be able to report on, be able to manage for us.
And I will say that this is something that the General Assembly is actively looking at. They've got their lobbyists up there. There was almost an Airbnb regulation that would have gone through last session. We do want to have something in writing of what our policy looks like. So there's the possibility that it can be grandfathered in, because not every city is the same. Asheville's issues are much different than Greensboro's issues, that are different than Chapel Hill's. So we want something that fits us the best. Otherwise, the state might tell us what we can do.
We will look at options for what that did. Councilman Hightower, we'll look for options of what that did, council choices of those distances.
Okay.
Are you looking for dates?
Yeah.
The cats today, I'm taking my kids to class.
All right, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Matheny, seconded by Dr. Wells. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, bye-bye.